endlessly searching for an original sin.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Sweet Pool. 2 episodes this week because I love you. The more he struggled, the harder the ropes dug into his wrists. Yuji lay on the floor immobile. The thin, fleshy creature was coiled around every part of his body. He could feel it pulsing against his skin. Worse was the crimson fluid, too sticky to be blood, that had soaked him through his clothes. It took all of his willpower not to empty his stomach. Though through his blurred vision, he could see wriggling lumps of scattered flesh all around the room, glistening in the dark light. Eventually, he realized he was laying on the floor of the chemistry lab. Still, that didn't explain the old man. Who was he? And what was he doing here? Biting back his disgust, Yuji glared up at him. The man lowered his arm to his side, then approached Yuji with a rapt expression.
本当に素晴らしい。メスであるお前が羨ましくなるほどにな。
He knelt down and grabbed Yuji's chin, gently turning him to face him.
御主様の悲願を達成するために、お前がメスが必要なのだ。知っているかな？今のこの世に繁栄している人類以外にも、かつては民がいたこと。
His gaze distant, he spoke with a theatrical passion.
現存する人類は、かつて神の慈愛を受けて救済された者たちの子孫だ。だが、神に認められずに見捨てられていった者もまた多くいる。同じ人間だというのに、神の一存で消されていった魂のなんと多いことか。彼らは神に否定されて、人の形を取ることを許されなかった。彼らの肉体は滅ぼされたが、魂は深い悲しみと怒りを引きずり、今もひっそりと生き続けている。ほら、今もこんなに我々の周りに。
He spread his arms wide to indicate the room. Damp little crimson lumps were everywhere, pulsing like living hearts. Was he saying that those things were humans who'd been forsaken by God? Was it madness? The man's eyes glinted unnaturally. He seemed to be drunk on his own monologue.
御主様は彼らの悲嘆を一身に背負われた。いわば救世主であらせられるのだ。御主様の願いは、神に否定された民をこの世に再び繁栄させること。私はな、直々にお告げを受けたのだ。御主様へ祈りを捧げていた時、どこからともなく声が聞こえた。次にメスが生まれたら、御主様へ捧げる儀式を行えと。そうすることで、御主様は今一度復活なされるとな。
His eyes blazed with dark passion.
そして、それは今、この時だ。
The man's deranged expression sent a shiver down Yuji's spine. It felt like he was being dragged down into his madness.
この場所は、かつて御主様が祀られていた聖地、聖堂があった場所だ。御主様は極度に衰弱しておられる。自ら動くこともままならない。だが、これで儀式が終われば、また。
Man released Yuji's chin and got to his feet. He walked off into the darkness, then returned moments later carrying something in his arms. Yuji couldn't make it out clearly, but it looked to be about the size of a newborn baby. It was some kind of stone. As Yuji squinted to it, he actually felt an inexplicable terror. At first glance, it looked inert, lifeless. But no, its surface was pulsating, covered in dark, veiny lines. As he watched, protrusions would sporadically rise from beneath the surface, then retract again, just as suddenly. They reminded him of tendrils that were wrapped around his body. Were those tendrils originally part of the stone? No, wait, it wasn't a stone. Its leathery surface reminded him of something else entirely. Something like dried, shrunken flesh.
お主様
The man caressed the object in his arms. That thing was the benefactor?
さあ、儀式を始めるぞ、善
Just then, Yuji heard the music in the background. Yoyak Koyak, whatever. The same tune that played every day at 5 p.m. Shadowy figure appeared near the lectern. Yuji stared in shock. He hadn't heard anyone enter the room. As the bells beat against his eardrums, the figure slowly stepped forward. With his eyes now adjusting to the darkness, Yuji could see his features clearly. A garish green shirt, long blonde hair. Xenia. What was he doing here? An instant later, Yuji got his answer. Xenia wasn't wearing his eye patch. His exposed right eye, normally hidden from sight, was hideously disfigured. Excuse me. Okay, we're back. Disfigured, the skin around it swollen and red. His eyeball was buried beneath the raised flesh. Blood trickled from his lower eyelid like scarlet tears. There was more. Xenia's chin, neck, hands, all of the exposed skin on his right side was red and raw, as though someone had peeled off the top layer. Yuji stared in disbelief. Xenia's usual smirk was nowhere to be seen. His face was pale as a fresh cadaver. Yuji barely recognized him.
おお、善ようやくだぞ待ち焦がれた時が来たこのメスを御主様へ捧げようそうすれば日々朽ちていくお前の体も完全なオスにしていただけるはずだ
Xenia shot the man a glance, then turned back to Yuji.
Okay.
He pulled something out of his pocket of his slacks. A pocket knife. Oh, a jackknife, sorry. It unfolded with a light, pleasant click.
あまり苦しませるのもかわいそうだからな一思いに息の根を止めてやりなさい
The man's voice echoed with a childlike glee as the dark red lumps pulsed in his arms. Eyes fixed on Yuji, Xenia slowly raised his knife. Sirens went off in Yuji's head. Desperate, he flailed against his intestinal restraints. Words are hard.
Bye-bye.
Xenia whispered in a low, cold voice. Then he stepped forward. Yuji was trapped. Sensing immediate death, he stared unblinkingly up at Xenia. The knife glittered high above Xenia's head. Yuji squeezed his eyes shut. The next thing he heard was a dull, wet noise, followed by a low groan of pain. When he opened his eyes, he saw Xenia leaning into the old man, the knife buried in his gut. The man's eyes were open wide. His precious meat lay forgotten on the floor by his feet.
善どうして
あんたさ、ほんとバカだよね。
So getting a tattoo on your neck like that, doesn't it hurt? Xenia growled as he forced the knife deeper into the man's stomach.
俺はあんたの願望とかどうでもいいんだよ。
After the final push, Xenia yanked the knife free. Holding his gut, the man trembled, then collapsed to his knees, almost in slow motion. Xenia exhaled softly. He was covered with blood, slowly a grin spreading across his face.
御主様バカじゃねえのマジ狂ってるだろこんなもんがなければさ俺は
Rage sparked in his eyes. He raised the knife high with both hands, then brought it down upon the crimson slab of meat.
こんな体にならずに済んだんだよ
やめろダメだやめろ やめろー
The sound of flesh ripping, tearing, drowned out the man's scream.
こんなもんがあるからあるから
He struck again and again and again. The room echoed with wet, stabbing sounds as blood splattered all over Xenia's body. The razor-sharp blade dug in mercilessly, and the red lump began to wilt like a day-old balloon. Blood poured from its wounds, pooling on the floor. The old man's wailed in despair. The smell of copper was nauseatingly thick. Finally, Xenia fell still, save for the heave of his shoulders. The lump was little more than a formless chunk now. Xenia's anger had faded. Now his expression was just blank. With blood dripping from his long blonde hair, he looked like a warrior from some ancient battlefield. Limply he rose, bloody knife still in hand. He gazed at Yuji with a look of unnatural calm.
やっと二人きりになれたね幼児
Thank you, Xenia. Please untie me and now go for the butt.
ずっと知りたかったんでしょだからここに来たんだよね
Cold fear trickled down his spine. Xenia was going to kill him. But he couldn't move, not with the intestine creature still binding him in place. Xenia approached at a leisurely pace.
昨日さ試しに御主様とやらが吐き出した種肉を学校で飼ってる動物にやってみたのあれ俺だったんだけどねしたらさみんな死んじゃったすごいよねちゃんと効き目あるんだよね
So Xenia was responsible for the massacre, but what did he mean by flesh seeds? The first thing that came to mind were the lumps scattered around them. Guffawing to himself, Xenia came to a stop next to where Yuji lay.
俺ね幼児のこと大好きだよだってやっと生まれた大事なメスなんだものだからさずっと俺のものにしたくってしょうがなかったんだ
Crouching down, he spoke in a sing-song voice as he reached out to touch Yuji's cheek. Something warm and sticky clung to Yuji's skin. A drop of blood dripped from Xenia's chin to the floor right in front of his face. The blonde stared down at him with dull, lifeless eyes. His hand slid down Yuji's face and seized his chin.
今までのことは全部メスの幼児が悪いんだよオスを挑発して引っかき回してだから償おうねこれで全部おしまい
Something wet touched his throat. He felt a tiny prick of pain and realized it was the knife. Xenia leaned in until their noses touched.
じゃあね大好きだったよバイバイ
Bite. I really do like Xenia's voice actor. Some people said they found out who Konehito's voice actor is. I'm curious if the other ones are well known in Japan. Yuji's body went rigid. His eyes shut tight. The pain to his throat grew. The door slid open and Xenia froze. Casting against the light in the hallway was a dark shape stepping into the room. Tetsuo.
白沼
Xenia snorted, then shot a smirk at the new arrival.
やっと来たか遅いんだよバーカメール投げてからどれだけかかってんだよ
So Xenia had sent that email. It sounded like he'd sent one to Tetsuo too, but why? Xenia pulled the knife away from Yuji's throat and got to his feet. Tetsuo came to a stop a small distance away. His expression was the same as always, and Yuji sensed something different, an intensity. A shiver ran down his spine.
あと1分遅かったら幼児殺しちゃうとこだった。
何なんだよこれは。
His low growl cut through the copper air.
儀式だよ。そこでぐちゃぐちゃになってるご神体を復活させるためのな。けどそんなのどうでもよかった。
Okay,
俺は
so we date
お前
Tetsuo.
と幼児を呼び出したかったんだよ。
I can wait. So we date Tetsuo and we keep Zenya around as a bodyguard. Is everyone cool with that? Oh, and Katani too, because Katani chill. Is everyone good with that? Good, good. Zenya stomped hard on the benefactor, which was floating in a pool of its own blood.
聖地に儀式。最高の舞台だろ。おあつらえ向きだ。メスを奪い合うにはさ。
Zenya's lips twisted into a sneer as he lowered himself into a fighting stance.
ずっとこの日を待ってたんだ。ずーっとさ。いい加減、お前、目障りなんだよ。
With a scream, he charged, swinging his blade. Tetsuo jumped back, but the tip of the blood-soaked blade grazed his arm, carving a vertical line from his wrist to his elbow.
白沼
After all of his flailing, the rope binding Yuji's arms had finally came loose. Yuji got to his feet and dashed over to Tetsuo. Blood flowed steadily from his wound.
血が
He looked around for something to use as a bandage. But then, right before his eyes, something impossible happened. The blood slowed, then congealed as the wound started to heal itself. Come to think of it, Yuji had witnessed this once before. And at the time, it had reminded him of his father. Zenya watched silently for a moment, then suddenly burst out of laughing.
やっぱりそういうことだったんだ。
He brought the knife to his lips and licked the blood from the blade with a smile.
変だと思ってたんだけどさ。お前、やっぱりオスだろ。しかも、宿肉と相当相性のいい、優秀なオス。
Then his face contorted with rage.
だからあの子も聞かなかったんだ。ああ、そうか。耐性があったんだな。だから。ああ、ムカつく。
While muttering to himself, he slowly extended his knife out to the side.
ムカつく、ムカつく。なんでなんだよ！
Once again, even if you haven't been into the yaoi part of this, can we all just agree the art is fantastic? He screamed and lunged at Tetsuo a second time. Tetsuo shoved Yuji away, then leapt back to avoid the arc of the blade. Zenya's attacks were wild and reckless. He swung at Tetsuo again and again. Tetsuo caught his arm mid-slash. They struggled for dominance, glaring into each other's eyes.
なんで俺が出来損ないでお前がそうじゃないんだよ。おかしいじゃねえか。そうやってメスも幼児も手に入れて。
Zenya growled through gritted teeth.
俺がどんなに苦しんできたかお前にわかるか。この不完全なくだらねえ体のせいで毎日ちょっとずつきしんで腐っていく。この体に無理に入ったクソ肉のせいで俺の体は少しずつ死んでいくんだよ。なのにお前はただ優秀なオスってだけでメスも勝手に近づいてくる。不公平だよな。だからせめてお前は死ねよ。死んで俺を少しでも幸せにしろ。
His scream echoed through the chemistry lab, yanking his arm free of Tetsuo's grip. He swung his blade once more. Tetsuo narrowly avoided the desperate attack. but he didn't account for the follow-up. The blade sunk into his shoulder, and Zenya's expression broke out into delirious joy. The flicker of pain crossed Tetsuo's face, but then he grabbed Zenya's arm. Zenya's smile stiffened. He tried to pull away, but Tetsuo held fast. Alright, so... we know what the rule is. Let me save. Why do you always go right to the quick save? Tetsuo's fist exploded against Zenya's face. His entire upper body went backwards from the force. He relinquished his grip on the knife and stumbled backwards, covering his face with both hands. Tetsuo took a breath, then ripped the knife from his shoulder. Blood gushed from the wound, staining his shirt red. He tossed the knife to the floor, then closed in on Zenya. Before the other man could escape, Tetsuo seized him by the collar and readied his fist once more. A dull thud resonated through the lab, and Zenya reeled, blood gushing from his nose and mouth. Tetsuo didn't stop. Bone smashed against bone again and again in a rhythmic mixture of grunts of pain. Yuji found himself rooted to the spot. The ferocity of Tetsuo's assault was like nothing he'd ever seen before. Every time he swung his fist, drops of red sprayed through the air. Yuji couldn't bear to watch any longer. He needed to make Tetsuo stop. Forcing his body to cooperate, he ran over to them. Just then, Tetsuo raised his bloody fist high above his head. Before he could bring it back down, Yuji seized his arm from behind.
Shironuma!
The motion of Tetsuo's arm jerked Yuji forward. He was unbelievably strong. Every inch of Zenya's face was covered in blood.
ダメだ。それ以上やったら。
Tetsuo slowly turned to look over his shoulder, and Yuji's heart nearly stopped. Tetsuo's eyes were filled with a dark bloodlust, his face dripping with bright red. For the first time, his anger was plain to see. Yuji shrank back. For a moment, he was certain that he was Tetsuo's next target. But then, without breaking eye contact, Tetsuo lowered his fist. He released his grip on Zenya's collar, and the other man crumpled to the floor like a sandbag. But just as Yuji heaved a sigh of relief, Zenya heaved himself to his feet, then took another lurching step toward Yuji. Next thing he felt was a sharp heat of his thigh. Confused, he looked down to find that Zenya had plunged the jackknife into his leg. He grimaced in pain. It felt like he had been stuck with a hot poker.
ざまみろ。
Zenya laughed weakly, swaying on his feet. Without a moment's hesitation, Tetsuo pulled the knife out of Yuji's thigh and thrust it into Zenya's gut. His arm sank so deep Yuji could scarcely believe it. Zenya clutched at his stomach. Dark stains spread across the front of his shirt. Moaning in agony, he stumbled backwards into the window. His hand reached up, and with a vicious glare at Tetsuo, he seized the blacked-out curtain. Whether it was a gesture of desperation or resentment, Yuji wasn't sure. Still, gripping the curtain with shaking fingers, Zenya slid to the floor, his strength drained. The thick black curtains fell with him, and a moment later, dazzling light shone in through the exposed window pane. Yuji squinted his eyes. The sunset was 1,000 times brighter than blood could ever hope to be. Lumps of flesh, oceans of blood, old man lying face up on the floor, Zenya slumped beneath the window. The light laid in carnage bare. As he stared out at the brilliant sunset, Yuji began to hear a strange sizzling. Smoke rising from the benefactor, or rather, from what was left of it. Protrusions shot up across its surface, flailing in silent agony. The pool of blood began to bubble and shrink, and the hiss of the steam sounded to Yuji's ears like a desperate howl.
お主様
Yeah, I don't think there's a god in this one. With his dying breath, the old man called for his messiah. No sound came from where Zenya lay. Yuji stood in a stupor, his injured leg forgotten. Then, all of a sudden, Tetsuo grabbed his hand. Yuji turned to look at him. The bloodlust had faded from his eyes. Tetsuo tugged lightly on his hand.
帰ろう。
Home? That sounded good. Gazing into Tetsuo's eyes, he nodded. Tetsuo's shoulders already seemed to be healing, but Yuji's wound was making it hard to walk. With Tetsuo leading him by the hand, Yuji limped towards the door. Well, that was exciting. And that's where we're going to leave it, guys. See you all next time. We are again getting very close to the ending. 3 games will be ending soon. See you guys next time. Thanks again for all of your support. Bye, everybody.